The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Party. Part 2. Thereupon the 12 Dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand, while the Hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the Dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and shred the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you're finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully, carefully with the plates. And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away, safe as quick as lightning, while the Hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin, with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or beyond the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. The Gandalf smoke rings would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's hand. He had quite a cloud for them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Keely and Feely rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dory, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombor produced a drum from the hall. Biffer and Boffer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin had sent. "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch. Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with violas as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into the dark lands on strange moons, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hall under the hill. The dark came into the room. From the little window that opened in the side of the hill, the firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one, and then another, began to sing as they played. Deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes, and this is like a fragment of the song, if it can be like the song without the music. "Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, where hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow holes beneath the fells. the ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragon fire in twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carve there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There they lay long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night, the fire was rend, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, the dwarves they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our hearts and gold from him. As they sang, the Hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, and by cunning, and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountain, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wield a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels, of the dwarves shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably someone lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins, a Bag End, Underhill, again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch a lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go hide beneath the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with shining eyes in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he had guessed both halves of the Hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo, apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Dark, the dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool, and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are not together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious Hobbit, may the hair on his toes never fall out, all praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from a Hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator. Then no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are meant to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counsellor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our objective is, I take it, well known to us all. To the Estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one of the two younger dwarves, I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would have probably gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not already known. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At "may never return," he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in his firework glare the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all they could get from him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize this was only poetic exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-granduncle Bullroarer, who was so huge, poor hobbit, that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Gram in the Battle of the Greenfields, and knocked the King Golfamul's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour, and this is what he heard. Glowin speaking. "Humph," or some snort more like. "Will he do you think? It's all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill a lot of us." I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bread and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggin Pot regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I had overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I'm right in believing, and this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms of the last desert. I had a great-great-great-granduncle once, Bullroar Took, and—" Yes, but that was long ago," said Glowin. "I was talking about you, and I assure you there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar, if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of this sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for the meeting here this Wednesday at tea time." "Of course there is a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let any one of you say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal." He scowled so angrily at Glowin
The dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask questions, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or he will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this."
On the table in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. "This was made by Thror, your grandfather Thorn," he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. "It is a plan of the mountain." "I don't see that will help us much," said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. "I remember the mountain well enough, and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath where the great dragons breed." "There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin, "but it would be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrived there." "There's one point that you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls." "It may have been secret once," said Thorin, "but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug had lived there long enough to know now to find out anything there is to know about these caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years." "Why?" "Because it is too small. 5 feet high at the door, and 3 may walk abreast," said the runes. "But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale." "It seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favourite marks marked in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon, he asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. "In lots of ways," said Gandalf, "but in what way this one has been hidden we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the sound of the mountain. That is the usual dwarf's method. I think that is right, isn't it?" "Quite right," said Thorin. "Also," went on Gandalf, "I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is," he said, and handed it to Thorin, a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. "Keep it safe." "Indeed I will," said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things began to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far we have had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, the trouble would begin. "A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east," interrupted Gandalf. "We might go from there up along the river running," went on Thorin, taking no notice, "and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon, too, far too often, unless it's changed." "That'd be no good," said the wizard, "not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I've tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles and dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remember the existence of a signed door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now, let's get on and make some plans." "Very well then," said Thorin. "Supposing this burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions." He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. "First, I should like to know a bit more about things," he said, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still
tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking about this all for hours? All the same, I should like it plain and clear, he said obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who try to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional, and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and rumination, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huge holes and great workshops. In addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold, and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the river running as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths, and reward even the least skillful most richly. Farmers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices, and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it. Not to speak of the most marvellous and magical toys, the like of which has not been found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves whenever they can find them, and they guard the plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from bad, though they usually have a notion on the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even in men a loose scale of their own armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction the dragons made going from bad to worse. There was a most especially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and crackling in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside. I was, luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the wood, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in the dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of the great gate, and there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam, and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept through the front gate, and routed out all the howls and the lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions and passages. After that there were no dwarves left alive inside, and he took all the wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, he has piled it all in a great heap far inside, and sleeps on it as a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined, and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives near the mountain and the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug, and there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they got away, they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we have had to earn our living, as best we could, up and down the lands, often sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. We have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I was allowed to have a good bit laid back and are not so badly off, and hear Thurn stroke the gold chain round his neck, we still need to get it back and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I have often wondered about my father and grandfather's escape. I see now that they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, I should have liked to know how Gandalf got a hold of it and why he did not come to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thrall was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name. Yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday, and never been seen by you since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this, to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and way of handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours, so on the whole I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, he said, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed. And lots of adventures, a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Whatever you be doing there? Asked Thorn with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out, as usual, and a nasty bit of business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the Necromancer. Don't be absurd. He's an enemy quite beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together, if they could all be collected again for the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished for was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough for the takes of you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly toward him, and he was so flustered he answered, Hear what I have got to say. Well, what's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the sign door. Dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And, well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed and an early start and all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before we go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like eggs with my ham when starting on a journey. Fried, not poached, and mind you don't break them. After that, all the others had ordered their breakfast, without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much. They all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms, and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The Tookishness was wearing off, and he was not quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the next bedroom near him. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long-forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he finally woke up. Thus ends part 2 of chapter 1 of The Hobbit. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will like and subscribe if you did. Thank you.